So let's talk about something that's been happening kind of under the radar in the world of academia. It's the story of industrial organizational psychology, or IO psychology for short. It's the science of work, how to hire the right people, build amazing teams, and make jobs better. But for decades now, this entire field has been on the move, quietly shifting its home base in a way that could change it forever.
This whole thing really kicks off more than 50 years ago with this incredibly bold prediction from one of the giants in the field, Ed Lawler. Way back in 1971, he just came out and said it. IO psychology is packing its bags and moving out of psychology departments and into business schools. I mean, what a provocative thing to say. It suggested a massive change was coming for an entire scientific discipline.
So, the big question is, was he right? Did this prophecy actually come true? Did a whole field of study really just get up and move? And if it did, what in the world does that mean for the science of how we work? Well, let's dig in and find out. Okay, so to figure this out, we've got to follow the trail. And in science, that trail, well, it leads to the data. We need to look at who controls the flow of ideas in the field's most important journals.
Let's start with who's in charge. The gatekeepers of science, right? The editorial boards of the top journals. If you look at one key journal back in 1948, the number of board members from business schools was 0, literally 0. Fast forward to 2013, a staggering 77%. The power completely and totally flipped from psychology departments to business schools.
And get this, it wasn't just the people in charge. The folks actually publishing the research, they followed the exact same path. Back in 1948, in that same journal, 0 authors came from business schools. By the 2010s, that number was nearly 60%. It's pretty clear. The most influential researchers had made the move. So you gotta ask, why the big move? Well, a huge piece of the puzzle is, you guessed it, money. On average, an assistant professor in a business school pulls in 65% more than their colleague in a psychology department. And think about this for a second. A starting salary in a business school can actually match the salary of a full psychology professor who's been there for decades.
Now, looking at all this, you might be thinking, wow, so IO psychology is just dying out in psych departments? But the real story is way more interesting than that. This isn't a story about a field going extinct. It's a story about it evolving.
And this is where things get really fascinating. It's a total paradox, because while the top researchers are leaving, the field itself is actually growing. Membership in the main professional organization, SIOP, has been climbing steadily for years, and so have the number of graduate programs. So Lawler's prediction was kind of right, but also kind of wrong. It's not the entire field that's moving, it's the most influential researchers.
As you can imagine, a shift this big has caused a major debate. The community is basically split into 2 camps. Is this a catastrophic brain drain that's gutting the field, or is it a necessary eye-opener that's making it stronger? On one hand, you've got the brain drain argument. The idea here is that psychology departments are being stripped of their best talent, which weakens the very scientific foundation of the field. But then you have the eye-opener crowd, who say, hey, wait a minute, this move is a good thing. It's giving the field more relevance, more influence, and a ton of new opportunities for real-world impact.
All right, let's unpack this a little. We're going to look at 3 different perspectives, starting with the folks who've stayed in the field's traditional home, the psychology departments.
For them, you can really feel the sense of loss. It's that classic brain drain scenario. Their top colleagues, the people who mentor the next generation of psychologists, are being poached. They worry the future students won't get the best training, and there's this deep-seated fear that IO is just becoming a footnote within psychology, that the field is losing its soul, its core psychological roots.
Okay, so what about the people who actually made the jump? Let's hear the view from the business schools. And what's interesting here is that it's not all sunshine and roses from their perspective either.
They definitely see the upsides for sure. Things like bringing real scientific rigor to business research and getting amazing access to companies and data for their studies. But they see the downsides too. They worry that the I side of IO, the nitty-gritty stuff like personnel selection and training, is getting left behind. And some even talk about this growing, unhealthy obsession with theory over stuff that actually works in the real world.
All right, that's 2 sides of the story, but what about the third? The people on the front lines, the ones actually using all this research, the practitioners.
And wow, their perspective is totally different. This group is, by far, the most optimistic. For them, this move is a huge eye-opener. They believe that when the research is done inside a business context, it just becomes way more relevant, more useful. It forces IO psychologists to speak the language of business, which makes the whole field more influential and practical. For them, there's no crisis here. This is just smart evolution.
Okay, so given all these different views, where is this train headed? The authors of a study we're looking at don't just stop there. They make some really bold predictions about the future.
And here's the big one. They predict that the field is headed for a massive fundamental split. It's not just changing its address, it's on a path to be cleaved right down the middle, creating two very different versions of IO psychology.
So here's what they call the Great Divide. First, business schools are going to completely own IO research. Pretty much all the big influential studies will come from there. And second, psychology departments, they're going to pivot and become the primary training centers for IO practitioners, focusing on master's programs that teach students how to apply the science in the real world, not in academia.
And you can bet that this division, this split between where the research is done and where the practitioners are trained, is going to have a huge effect on what kind of research even gets funded and published in the first place.
Here's how that split plays out. The O side, organizational psychology, leadership, motivation, teamwork, that's going to be the star of the show in business schools. Meanwhile, the I side, industrial psychology, the more technical stuff like employee selection and training analysis, that's going to stay mainly in psychology departments, where it directly supports the training of practitioners.
So what does this all boil down to? Well, it's nothing short of a fundamental identity crisis for an entire discipline. It forces everyone involved to ask, what exactly is IO psychology anymore? Is it a subfield of psychology that happens to study work, or is it a core management science that just uses psychological tools? Where it belongs will literally define what it becomes.
The authors wrap things up with this really powerful quote from astronaut James Lovell. And it's not just a quote, it's a direct challenge to the entire field of IO psychology about its own future.
And that's really the question we're left with, isn't it? We're watching this massive, hidden migration reshape a science right before our eyes. So is this an evolution to just sit back and watch happen? Or is it a future that needs to be actively shaped by the people within it? The answer is going to define the psychology of our workplaces for generations to come.